If you looked closely at the generals standing behind President Donald Trump this morning, you didn't see ease. You didn't see the relaxed posture that comes with routine policy disagreements. You saw something tighter than that, controlled, restrained, deliberate, because what unfolded today was not another policy spat between neighboring countries. It wasn't about dairy quotas. It wasn't about lumber tariffs. It wasn't even truly about the border. It was something deeper. And in that moment, I think they understood it. Today, the President of the United States publicly rebuked a country that has stood shoulder to shoulder with America through a century of war, not privately, not through diplomatic back channels, but in front of cameras. If this had been about revisiting a treaty, we could categorize it as politics as usual. Nations clash, leaders posture. That's part of international negotiation. But this went further. He made it personal. And once rhetoric crosses that line, it becomes difficult to retract. In remarks that have already begun disappearing from some online platforms, the president didn't just criticize Canada's defense spending or economic posture. He referenced their war dead, 457 Canadian service members killed in Afghanistan. Men and women who wore the maple leaf on their shoulders but served in coordinated operations alongside American troops. Soldiers who fought in Kandahar, in Helmand, in valleys where U.S. units rotated home because Canadian forces filled the gap. When that clip reached Ottawa, something shifted. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not shout. He did not issue a fiery denunciation. He walked to a podium, adjusted the microphone, and read a single name from a prepared sheet of paper. Just one. In that silence, the atmosphere changed. The kind of stillness you feel before a storm, because this was no longer noise. It was rupture. Over the next few minutes, I want to walk you through what followed. The internal Pentagon assessment circulating this afternoon, the concern about northern defense exposure, and how a country known globally for diplomacy may have quietly placed leverage on the American energy grid. Let's rewind to this morning. The spark began with what should have been a routine question. A reporter asked about stalled negotiations over Arctic defense funding. Normally, that's a technical topic: icebreakers, radar modernization, cold weather logistics. But the president had just exited a national security briefing. Advisors reportedly emphasized that the United States depends heavily on Canadian cooperation to secure the northern approach, that the Arctic flank is vulnerable without coordination, and historically, he does not respond well to being told he needs another country. So he stepped toward Marine One and declared that Canada was a security liability. He labeled them free riders. He announced suspension of their Tier 1 intelligence clearance. They're out of the room, he said. That was the first shock. Tier 1 clearance is not symbolic. It represents the highest level of intelligence trust. It allows Canadian commanders at NORAD in Colorado Springs to sit alongside American officers and evaluate missile detection data in real time. It is integrated into the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. When he said they were out, he didn't just bruise diplomatic feelings. He altered an operational framework. Then a reporter followed up. She reminded him that Canada invoked NATO's Article 5 after September 11th, that 158 Canadians died in Afghanistan. She asked whether that sacrifice mattered. The president laughed. He dismissed it. He compared casualty numbers to urban crime statistics. He wasn't talking about trade at that point. He was talking about blood. Imagine being a parent in Saskatchewan whose son died in 2008 after an improvised explosive device detonated near a U.S. convoy. Imagine watching that clip replayed. The reaction in Canada was immediate and bipartisan. The hashtag #457 trended nationwide. Photos of flag-draped coffins traveling along the Highway of Heroes resurfaced. Images of Canadian medics evacuating wounded Americans circulated widely. Inside Washington, phones began ringing. At the Pentagon, a different alarm was sounding. Geography does not bend to politics. The United States' most exposed vector of attack is the Arctic. Any missile launched from Eurasia crosses over the polar region. It crosses Canadian airspace first. For decades, U.S. defense planners have relied on installations across northern Canada, radar chains, listening stations, the North Warning System. When the president declared Canada out, legal and operational reviews began immediately. A memo reportedly circulated among senior officers with the subject line, Operational Blackout, Northern Sector. It warned that if Canada restricted access or data sharing, early warning capacity could drop by as much as 40%. 40%. In nuclear defense calculations, 15 minutes can determine whether an interception is possible. America may possess the arsenal, but Canada provides geographic vantage. You cannot intercept what you cannot detect. By midday, reports indicated Canadian officers at NORAD headquarters were preparing to withdraw pending clarification. One Air Force colonel described the situation as a divorce where one partner walks out holding the keys. Markets notice instability, so do adversaries. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Carney responded in a markedly different tone. He went to the Canadian War Museum. He stood before the tomb of the unknown soldier. He did not say President Trump's name. He did not mention tariffs. He said the sacrifice of 457 Canadians purchased freedom for two nations. And if that cost had been forgotten, it was time to remember it. Then he announced Operation Sovereign North. It was not military. It was economic. Canada initiated a national security review of energy exports to the United States. The language mirrored Washington's own legal framework. Canada must ensure its resources are not supporting hostile conduct. Quebec supplies electricity to parts of New York and New England. Alberta exports heavy crude tailored to American refinery configurations. Those refineries cannot easily substitute lighter domestic oil without infrastructure adjustments. Carney did not halt exports. He ordered regulatory inspections, environmental reviews, pipeline safety assessments. Within hours, oil flow data suggested a 15% slowdown into parts of the Midwest. Electricity spot prices in New England ticked upward. No dramatic speeches, just structural pressure. This is the difference between loud power and leverage embedded in infrastructure. Meanwhile, veterans on both sides of the border reacted strongly. U.S. service members who fought alongside Canadian forces publicly shared stories from Afghanistan. One former Army sniper described being pinned down until Canadian troops extracted his unit under fire. "The president doesn't speak for me," he said in a widely shared video. Inside institutions like the Pentagon, honor is not rhetorical, it's cultural. When Allied sacrifice is dismissed, it strains that culture. Reports also indicated Russian bomber aircraft approached the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone hours later. Such flights are not uncommon, but coordination protocols between U.S. and Canadian forces appeared briefly unsettled. The aircraft turned back. Beijing, meanwhile, issued a carefully worded invitation to Prime Minister Carney to discuss resource stability. Strategic observers noted the symbolism. Economically, the stakes are immediate. The North American auto industry depends on cross-border supply chains. A single vehicle assembled in Detroit may cross the border multiple times during production. Friction at crossings disrupts assembly lines. Agriculture is equally intertwined. Canada represents a top export market for U.S. farmers. Retaliatory tariffs or regulatory delays could affect billions in trade. Energy price volatility feeds inflation. Lumber and aluminum costs influence housing markets. Investors monitor predictability. When alliances appear unstable, risk premiums rise. There are several possible outcomes. A de-escalation, where clarifying statements restore Tier 1 status quietly and rhetoric softens. An escalation, with increased inspections and potential trade retaliation intensifying economic strain. Or a gradual recalibration, Canada diversifying partnerships with Europe and Asia, redefining NORAD's scope, reshaping Arctic governance. Alliances rarely collapse overnight. They erode through hesitation, diversification, distance. For a century, the northern border has been called the world's most peaceful, not because it lacked defenses, but because it was reinforced by trust. Today, that trust showed visible cracks. Markets will open, energy contracts will be repriced, diplomats will test back channels. The next 72 hours may determine whether this was a rhetorical spike or a structural turning point. 457 names are not statistics. They represent shared sacrifice. The question now is whether partnership can withstand public contempt or whether this becomes the moment historians identify as the fracture point in North America's security architecture. If you've served, if you've lost someone, if you're watching this unfold and feeling unsettled, you're not alone, because alliances are not maintained by treaties alone, they are sustained by respect. We will soon learn whether cooler judgment prevails, or whether today marked the moment the Northern Shield began to thin.